Husband's secret yacht sailing in international waters with his mistress on board, and I'm not saying that the ocean took my marriage because it was hungry. I'm saying it because I'm 36, my name's Mara, I'm an air traffic controller, the woman in the tower who says cleared for takeoff in a voice that can keep a pilot from falling apart, and I watched my husband vanish into a horizon line I used to think was a metaphor, and it turned out to be an exit ramp. I didn't learn this from a confession or a lipstick on a collar. I learned it from AIS blips and a fuel receipt, from a boat that sometimes turned off its transponder the way people turn off their conscience, and from a late-night photograph texted by a deckhand who thought he was sending gossip to a friend and instead sent me the soundtrack to my own unraveling. You should know what my days look like so you understand the shape of the hole he slipped through. I work swing shifts, nights that bleed into mornings, a headset pressed to my temple like a second heartbeat, a grid of call signs and altitudes keeping me company the way some people keep plants. I live in a small apartment with big windows that look over the marina like I paid extra for foreshadowing. I do crossword puzzles with a pencil so I can change my mind. I married a man named Julian who sells experiences to rich people, which, as far as jobs go, is a polite way of saying he's excellent at making other people's weekends feel like destiny. He's charming in the way a good autopilot is. You hardly notice the corrections until you've arrived. The first clue was not cinematic, it was paperwork. A company I didn't recognize charged our card for provisions offshore. It was a number that looked like an accident until you did the math. Enough caviar to make someone think they had taste, enough diesel to make international waters a plausible dream. Client, Julian said when I asked, taking the phone from my hand with the practiced tenderness of a man removing a glass from a tipsy friend. They pay me, I pay for them, they reimburse. I accepted that because I have a job that rewards believing instruments, not instincts. The second clue arrived the way weather does, slowly then all at once. A midnight call, his voice thin with excitement. We might do a crossing, he said. Not Atlantic, geez. Just a run out past the line. He meant the line that is imaginary and also real, 12 nautical miles. The world's messy boundary. Why, I asked. Because wealth gets bored, he said, which in hindsight was the truest sentence he gave me all year. The photo came 3 weeks later. 2:17 my break. A deckhand named Theo whose number I recognized from group chats but whose face I only knew as a hat and a grin. It was blurry, the way things are when the camera isn't the point. The deck. Ropes coiled like polite snakes. The stern of a yacht with a name that was almost tacky, True North. And at the rail, with the way the night makes everyone equal, my husband holding a champagne flute rung like a nervous actor, and a woman leaning against him, her hair performing a breeze. You could chalk it up to client relations. You could. Except for the caption, they're christening the boat with kisses LL. Except for the coordinates tagged under the image like negligence, 13.4 nautical miles. International water. A border crossed not for romance but for jurisdiction. I stared at the coordinates long enough to memorize them and then hated myself for doing my job to my own hurt. You okay? Asked Jace, the guy who sits 2 positions down and knows the exact number of chips in the vending machine at all times. Yep, I said, the syllable perfectly round and dishonest. I put the phone face down the way you do when an object starts trying to narrate you. I handed off my sector, walked to the bathroom, and leaned my forehead against a metal stall door like a pilgrim who chose a less holy place. Then I did something I'm not proud of and can defend in any courtroom of my choosing. I called the Marina Harbormaster as if I were asking about weather. He told me what I already knew. True North had left quietly, filed a destination that wasn't real, and had turned off her AS transponder 10 miles out like a child closing his eyes and believing you couldn't see him if he couldn't see you. That weekend, I became a study in professionally executed panic. I set up a free account on a vessel tracker that refreshes too slowly for anyone who's actually worried. I learned the yacht's MMSI the way you learn a lover's birth date. I stared at the chart and imagined the boat as a bright bead dragging a future behind it. When it went dark, I pictured it anyway, the white wake like a callous signature, the woman at the rail learning how to lean. I made a list, because lists can trick your heart into thinking it's in charge. Fuel docks that don't ask questions, private moorings, tender services that operate after midnight. I added a line I pretended was a joke because jokes are armor, mermaid accessories optional. I didn't confront him right away. I am, by profession, a student of timing. Something about hearing the truth too soon felt like radio static. When I did it, it was at our kitchen counter with the kind of calm that worries people. He sliced a lime for a drink he insisted was more about the ritual than the alcohol and asked how my shift was. Busy, I said, and then, like I was describing holding for weather, I got a photo of you last night. He blinked and shrugged with one shoulder, a move you could mistake for charm if you hadn't paid for it with your 20s. Clients love a picture, he said. It was taken 13 miles out, I said, and watched the tiniest flinch ripple his right eye. That's international waters, he said, as if I didn't spend my life looking at invisible lines. Who was she? I asked, making the mistake of using the singular. A client, he said, refusing gender like it was a trap and not an algorithm. We kissed the bow. Then you kissed each other, I said, and he did a small thing with his mouth that used to make me want to forgive him. I'm a performer, he said, as if he was suddenly employed by Broadway. We said unkind things softly. He called me controlling, I called him vague. He said I didn't remember how to have fun. I said he didn't remember how to tell the truth before a receipt did. He slept on the couch and I slept in a bed that felt like it had forgotten my shape. In the morning he made an omelet like a treaty and I ate it like a starving prisoner who doesn't trust the guards. The day performed its obligations. The boat didn't come back. I hired a private investigator the way some people buy dessert, like they're cheating on a diet that never fed them. Her name is Alma, and she has the moral clarity of a person who has dated too many magicians. Boats are easy, she said in a voice that made paperwork sound like a blade. Boys are easier. We sat at a cafe where the music tried to be private, and she slid a printed dossier across the table like we were in a show that required props. Charter licenses, ownership layers stackable like cheap dolls, crew rosters with nicknames, a legitimate schedule full of charity cruises, and a shadow itinerary that used efficiency as a decoy. She showed me satellite screenshots, grainy and godlike. A dot here, a dot there. She pointed at them like constellations. He meets in the anchorage between jurisdictions, she said. There's a mooring no one claims. It's very romantic if you don't have a mortgage. What do people do out there? I asked, hating that I sounded like a tourist at a crime. They pretend, she said. They pretend they don't pay taxes. They pretend their secrets are lost at sea. They pretend they didn't text coordinates to the wrong person. She looked up then with a private little grin that was both profession and personality. Do you want a picture? She asked. No, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. I want a plan. Plans are how I buy oxygen. I signed up for 2 extra shifts. I let the apartment fall into the kind of gentle neglect that reads as warning to people who know you. I stopped asking Julian what time he'd be home. When he was home, he was bright with the gloss of someone who has found a new audience for his monologues about freedom. We could take a few months and just go, he said one night, drizzling olive oil on tomatoes like it was painting and not lunch. Where? I asked, and he said, away, and I realized I'd married a man who could make a directional adverb sound like a resort. Alma sent text messages in terse bursts. Tonight 23:50. Tender from B. Pierre. He bought a chart with a hand-drawn cove circled. There's a woman who arrives separately, she uses the name Locke. I tried not to picture her. Alma didn't send photos because I'd asked, but she sent words that painted anyway, barefoot on teak, laughter like a dropped glass, a song hummed under breath that wasn't for anyone and therefore was for everyone. I learned the mistress's patterns before I learned her face. New sandals, an old tote bag with a sailmaker's logo, a silver ring on her index finger like a choice. Lark. I irony laughed. If your code name sounds like flight, of course you meet a man who sells the idea of motion. I didn't follow them the first time. I followed the second. I wore black like a cliché, which mostly meant I wore what I always wear when I'm tired. The marina after midnight is a sermon. It says things like hush and choose and regret. I walked along B Pier with the gait of someone who belongs. This is a trick I learned in the tower, how to move like authority without having to raise my voice. I recognized the tender because it announced itself with the underclass roar of a motor that's sick of being pretty. The driver looked at me like I was a changed plan, and I held up a hand with a folded tip that I can admit was more than necessary. "Last ride," I said. He hesitated and then shrugged like a man who knows he'll blame the ocean if anyone asks. I sat at the bow and tasted diesel and a theater of salt. True North appeared at the edge of the boat's light like a made-up animal. She wasn't huge. She was expensive in the way some people are attractive, simple, immaculate, cruel. We pulled alongside and a deckhand took my hand without looking at my face, a politeness that felt like violence. I stepped onto the deck like a person stepping into a version of herself she does not want to keep. "Guests are aft," he murmured. The word guests hit my ribs and scattered like marbles. I didn't go aft. I walked the opposite direction, which is how you learn things quickly. The wheelhouse was lit in the gentle green that makes expensive decisions look holy. The radar showed the emptiness outside like a brag. The AIS screen was blank. If the sea had eyes, they were closed. They were at the stern, where the rails a compromise between safety and drama. Music from the saloon slurred into the night, something with a bass line that insists your hips pay attention. Julian stood with his shirt undone in that way that wants you to notice the way it's undone. Locke sat on the rail like Balance was an old friend, her bare feet braced against polished steel. She laughed into his mouth. I didn't think, I spoke. "You turn off transponders the way children turn off lamps when they're scared of ghosts," I said. It isn't the line I would have chosen for a movie. It's the one I got. The deckhand went still. Locke turned with the speed of a dancer pretending to be lazy. Her eyes took me in with a kindness I would later learn was none of my business. Julian's face did that performance where it tries on 3 kinds of innocence and none of them fit. "Mara," he said, like my name was the punchline and we just hadn't gotten to it yet. "How did you? The world is mapped," I said. "You just prefer the parts where the legend is missing." We didn't scream. That's not how quiet crimes unravel. We negotiated with sentences. He told me the sea made him feel like a person invented by better writers. I told him better writers still pay taxes. He told me that the line 12 miles was imaginary. I told him it's the imaginary lines that make people behave. He told me I had the tower, couldn't he have the horizon? "Not for cheating," I said, and it came out more tired than furious. Locke watched like a woman who's seen long arguments and knows when to add something small. "Do you want tea?" she asked, as if this were a living room. "No," I said, because if I accepted a mug I was never leaving. "Then I'll have one," she said and disappeared, which was the most generous thing a mistress has ever done for me. Julian and I stood there with the deck rising and falling under us like a nod. "Do you love her?" I asked, because I hate that question and also it's a necessary loss. He said nothing. The horizon waited. "Do you love me?" I asked and watched his body choose yes before his mouth did. "I want you," he said carefully. "I also want this." He meant the rail, the hush after midnight, the lie that water makes true. "You can't have international waters for ethics," I said. "You can only have them for fish." He reached for me and I stepped back and my heel hit a coil of line and I righted myself on a reflex thousands of visual scans have taught me. It was comic and then it wasn't. "You could come," he said. "We could make it ours." I laughed, ugly this time. "I have a sector at 0400, I said. "Planes cross borders by telling us they will. Boats cross borders by believing no one is watching. I'm not interested in romance that requires deniability." Locke returned with a mug and a cardigan like a concession to weather. She looked at me with a long, unflinching consideration. "He's frightened," she said, not as collaboration but as meteorology. "Of what?" I asked. "Of being a version of himself he can recognize when the engines are off," she said. It was both true and the kind of truth that makes me want to spit. She sipped her tea and made a small face. "Mint," she said, apologizing to no one. This is where I should say I made a scene. I didn't. I made a choice that looked boring from land. I left. Turn your IS back on, I said to the captain as I passed the wheelhouse, unless you want to visit, and used a tone that made him sweat in a way I hope was educational. The tender driver took me back in a silence that felt like we were both working on a math problem. The marina's lights winked, which is the thing lights do when they can't help you. I walked the pier with the measured pace of someone not ready to know if her legs will shake when she stops. The next day I filed for a separation, which is as romantic as a grocery list and a better foundation. Julian texted me paragraphs that read like postcards from denial. We can write new rules, he said. We can be modern. Modern, I typed back, is paying for your choices up front. Lark texted me once, hours later, from an unknown number that had to be hers because it felt like standing very close to a person who is not threatened by eye contact. I'm not keeping him, she wrote. I stared at the sentence for a long time and then put the phone away because there are only so many sentences one woman should have to swallow in a day. Alma came over with a bottle and crispy things and the face of a woman who knows that justice is often just a well-documented invoice. You did good, she said. You didn't set anything on fire. I wanted to, I said. We always do, she said. We sat on my floor and ate like toddlers and she told me stories about men who think oceans erase metadata. I slept for 9 hours and woke up with a sore jaw from having clenched through my dreams. I bought a new pillow to trick my neck into trusting me. The following weeks were the administrative opposite of romance. Lawyers. Bank accounts. The deconjugation of furniture. I developed an allergy to nautical stripes. I donated the champagne flutes. The marina went on being 1,000 small stories that didn't need me. True North started broadcasting again like a repentant sinner, and yes, sometimes she turned off her AIS for an hour like a person who holds her breath in an argument just to see if it changes anything. Occasionally I'd catch her pop up on the tracker at dawn farther out than sense, and I would feel that old tug, not for him but for the part of me that likes maps because they promise that knowing is a kind of safety. Julian tried 3 strategies: contrition, arrogance, and art. Contrition in the form of flowers so tropical they looked like injuries. Arrogance in the form of telling mutual friends that our marriage had failed because I was wedded to structure. Art when he sent me a playlist titled Mara If You Were Water, which made me laugh so hard I had to sit down. I am not water, I wrote back. I am the shoreline. Stop trying to eat me. I saw Lark twice, by accident and on purpose. The accident was a grocery store, the kind of aisle where people argue with mustard. She looked ordinary in a way that made me love her a little. It takes effort to look human when a city wants you to be an archetype. We made eye contact and did the civil nod 2 women use when they both know the average price of lemons and also the market value of lies. The second time I texted her. Tea, I wrote. If you like mint. She sent an address near the marina. Her place was small, plant-drunk, nervous about dust. She poured tea without performing hospitality, which is my favorite kind. I'm not here to be noble, I said. Good, she said. I'm bad at witnessing nobility. We Saturday. She told me things I had decided not to ask Julian because sometimes the most merciful thing you can do to yourself is not feed your imagination. She kept it clinical. He liked the quiet after the anchor dropped. He liked to stand on the foredeck and pretend to be the figurehead. He liked it when someone read to him because he never lets anyone read to him on land. He likes to be the first to see the line of gray when morning decides to admit it's arriving, she said, and I thought of the tower and how we watched the whole sky turn a first hint that pilots call ready. Did you love him? I asked, because I was done being brave. I wanted to be nosy. Yes, she said. Like a rehearsal. Like an understudy. I loved him like the script, I said, and then we both smiled because humor is cheap medicine and we needed a lot. After the papers were signed, I moved into an apartment with worse light and better quiet. I bought curtains that look like water because I refused to turn my life into a theme park for other people's trauma. I kept my job because I am good at it and because it's the closest I come to believing in fate without wanting to fight it. I started running in the mornings, badly and then less badly, and then with a pleasure that frightened me because it felt like cheating on my grief. I made new friends with names like Teresa and Dev who don't know Julian and only know boats as things that sometimes need to be warned about aerial traffic. Once, a month after the divorce was final, I went down to the marina at dawn and watched the charter crews prep the pretty lies. Coffee steam, rope tricks, the choreography of men who can tie and untie their personalities with the same knot. True North glided in, professional, shameless. I recognized a new deckhand by the way he pretended to be born on teak. Julian saw me. He tapped his forehead like a salute, a gesture so masculine it made me allergic, and I did nothing back. Lark was not on board or she was below, which is the same thing from a pier. The harbor smelled like old fish and ambition. I went home and watered a plant I'd kept alive through spite and sunlight and thought, not unkindly, that there are worse things than learning to tell a story in which you are not an ocean, not a ship, not a lighthouse, but a person who can stand on the shore and point calmly and say, there. People ask if I hate the sea now. I don't. I'm too superstitious to hate something that could swallow me and too grateful for the fact that it hasn't. I still sit on the jetty sometimes with a thermos and a puzzle and pretend I don't love the way gulls pretend to be serious. When planes on final flare over the water like a practice sigh, I watch them and think, my vintage, my species. Boundary crossing done right, consent and paperwork and lights that stay on. I'm not romantic anymore about invisible lines. I respect them the way you respect a scar, a promise not to tell that story lazily again. If you want a moral, I only have this: there is no such place as international waters for your heart. Free of jurisdiction is a legal fiction, not a spiritual cleanse. Also, kiss on land. If you can't kiss on land, don't kiss. And if you must learn something from a woman who whispers into headsets and sometimes into the ears of her own doubt, when a man tells you the horizon is freedom, look for the map he's hiding behind his back. If he doesn't have one, he's not a captain. He's a tourist. You deserve better navigation. I still get photos sometimes. People send me boats the way strangers send each other sunsets, as if beauty is an apology that will eventually work. I save a few. I delete most. I kept one from Theo, the deckhand who texted me that first night without knowing his text would escort my life out of a room. It's of the stern wake at dawn, water folding over itself in a practiced lie. No people. No name. Just white churn fading to nothing. I look at it when I want to be dramatic, then I put it away and go to work and say cleared to land to a voice that has flown all night and is ready to trust the ground again. And sometimes walking home I stop by the pier, watch the tide change its mind and tell myself out loud like a pilot and a prayer, maintain heading. Hold steady. You're already home.